The Biden administration recently shared a major milestone on nuclear fusion, raising hopes of tangible progress toward limitless clean energy amid concerns over climate change. So what is the significance of this latest breakthrough? How does nuclear fusion differ from nuclear fission? And when will nuclear fusion start to power our society? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we explore efforts to advance nuclear fusion amid a recent breakthrough by scientists over in the US. For more, I have Professor Suh Kune-yull at Seoul National University. Professor Suh, it's good to have you with us.
Good to be on your show.
I also have Professor Troy Carter at the University of California, Los Angeles, live on the line as well. Professor Carter, it's a pleasure to have you with us as well.
Thanks for having me.
Right, Professor Carter, let's begin then with a few words from you on the significance of this latest success by US scientists.
Well, this is a huge milestone in fusion energy research. It's the first time in a controlled laboratory setting where more energy was generated by fusion reactions than the energy we had to put in to heat the fuel up to the right conditions. And just to explain that a little bit further, I'll remind you, fusion is the merging of light elements like helium to form heavier elements like hydrogen, sorry, I did that backwards, hydrogen to form helium, and also release energy. And this is the power source of the stars. This is why stars shine. You need conditions like the core of a star to make this happen. So that's very high temperature. So in the lab, the goal has been to heat fusion fuel to these conditions, hoping for fusion reactions to start, and then the energy released by those reactions will energize other parts of the fuel and cause those to burn, to have fusion reactions happen. It's a lot like trying to light a piece of wood with a lighter. You light one piece, and then the energy released from that flame will heat up a neighboring piece, and it'll start to burn. But it takes significant energy to heat fuel to fusion conditions. We've been trying to do this in the laboratory for around 60 years. And in all previous attempts, the amount of energy it took to get the fuel to the right condition, where it was hot enough that fusion was happening, exceeded what you got out in fusion energy. And that is until now, until a couple of weeks ago, when scientists at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, using the NIFIC facility, performed an experiment in which 2 megajoules of laser energy was used to heat and compress fusion fuel that ultimately released 3 megajoules via fusion reaction, so achieving what we call scientific break-even.
Right, and Professor Suh, before we delve any further, what is nuclear fusion and how does it differ from nuclear fission?
Good question, Sonny, because I'll be using my hand a little bit. Easy one first. Nuclear fission is, literally speaking, you try to break up one heavy nucleus like uranium-235 or even plutonium-239 into 2 parts by bombarding one neutron. It's easy enough. But it comes at a cost of producing fission products, which may be radioactive as well as even toxic. Now, the difficult one, nuclear fusion, has to do with fingernails, small, lighter atoms, as Troy has already alluded to. We're talking probably H2 and H3, which turn out to be deuterium and tritium. They tend to resist against each other because of electrostatic force. They're both positively charged. It's really hard to put them together. That's why we need tremendous amount of energy to raise the temperature to the range of 100 million degrees, which is about 7 times hotter than the core of the sun, and also 100 billion times the atmospheric pressure. Very, very hard to achieve. That's why it's been taking so long, and still a long way to go.
Right, I see. And would I be right, Professor Suh, in assuming that nuclear fusion leads to no radioactive waste products then, as opposed to nuclear fission?
I'm sorry?
Would I be right in assuming that that nuclear fusion leads to no radioactive waste products?
Essentially, but there's no free lunch, because if you put them all together, deuterium and tritium together, then we will be having helium, which turns out to be an alpha particle. That's radioactive, but it's very short range. It's okay. And there comes a very powerful neutron that's also radioactive, but we can use it for later use. to breed more tritium. So again, there's no free lunch, but it's much, much better than producing plutonium-239 or 240, which may be lasting 24,000 years. So much better in terms of radioactive decay products.
Right, I see. And Professor Professor Carter, could you tell us a bit more about the importance now of the global race to create an artificial sun, if I may?
Sure. Well, many would say that fusion represents the holy grail of energy sources. It has many attractive features. It's carbon-free and fuel's abundant on Earth. The NIF experiments, as was already pointed out, use deuterium, which is heavy hydrogen, and tritium, which is even heavier hydrogen. Deuterium is abundant in seawater, it turns out. This is heavy water. And tritium is unstable, so you have to produce it. But you can produce it using lithium. As I was already pointed out, that neutron that's generated by the DT reaction, if you can capture it in lithium, you'll generate more tritium that you can then use for fuel. It turns out that lithium, although we don't mine lithium from seawater right now, it's also abundant and dissolves lithium in seawater. If you look at both of them, within the sea, it represents basically hundreds of thousands of years of energy for all of humanity's needs. So it's very abundant. We think fusion could be a major contributor to the future of carbon-free electricity and can contribute to decarbonizing the energy sector by mid-century, as the Biden administration and many other foreign governments have called for. Fusion can provide a firm energy supply. So in other words, something you can turn on whenever you need it, put wherever you need it. This is an advantage over renewables, although I will say, I think to solve the climate crisis, we have to have all hands on deck, and renewables needs to exist alongside of fusion and fission to make this happen.
Right, of course. And keeping in mind what Professor Carter said, Professor Suh, can nuclear fusion be commercially viable, do you think?
Yes and no. Yes, indeed, theoretically speaking, because if you think about 1,000 megawatt electric power plant, we would need 2.5 million tons of coal to run it for a year. On the other hand, we would need just 250 kilograms of deuterium and tritium. So it's very economical, which means that it's actually deuterium and tritium-based fusion is actually 10 million times more energetic. So theoretically speaking, it should be commercially viable. But technically speaking, not yet, because see, we've been working on this for 60 years, still probably 30 or 40 more years in the future. So there's a famous saying that it's always 20 to 30 years in the future or into the future whenever we talk about this fusion, because it's so hard to attain that temperature as well as pressure, as well as density and duration time. Actually, Troy has alluded to the spark or ignition period, but what we really need is sustainability. It should be sustained for a longer period of time. If my understanding is correct, then Lawrence Livermore's NIF facility has done this only for a very, very brief period of second, 1 billionth of a second, which is literally 1 nanosecond. We will need to run this for seconds, minutes, hours, days, and months. Until then, there is a long and winding road. That's what is really stopping this technology from becoming very, very technically viable in the foreseeable future. You still need probably 30 more years to go.
Right, to sustain that energy then, I suppose. Professor Carter, exactly. I understand the method of generating energy from nuclear fusion differs among those currently involved in this endeavor. That being said, do you care to elaborate?
Yes. To make fusion reactions happen, you need to make your fusion fuel hot enough, dense enough, and confine it for long enough. That was just pointed out, to let sufficient fusion energy be produced. There are a range of schemes to accomplish this. The two perhaps leading schemes, one of which represented by the National Ignition Facility result that we're talking about, so-called inertial confinement, which I'll explain. The other leading scheme is magnetic confinement. So starting with the latter, in magnetic confinement, you use strong magnetic fields to hold this superheated ionized gas or plasma that is what the fusion fuel becomes once you heat it up. hold it in place long enough for fusion to occur. This is the basis for the ITER international experiment in France, as well as current planned experiments in the US, like the D3D tokamak in San Diego, and the planned Spark tokamak that's being built by a private company, Commonwealth Fusion Systems. In addition, Korea has K-Star tokamak that's operated, that's a magnetic confinement device. The NIF result uses what we call inertial confinement. So this uses intense lasers to compress and then heat a pellet of fuel. And the idea is you get it hot enough so it's starting to fuse, but then the idea is it's going to expand. It's going to basically explode with the energy that's produced by that fusion reaction. And the name of the game in inertial confinement is to arrange for enough fusion reactions to occur before it explodes. But fundamentally, ICF, the NIF approach, is a pulsed approach. The idea is you're going to hit many of these targets one after the other to release energy, maybe a few times a second.
Right, I see. And Professor Carter just mentioned South Korea. What more can you tell us about South Korea's efforts with regard to nuclear fusion?
Good point, Sunny, because Korea is home to its own star called K-Star, Korea Superconducting Tokamak Advanced Research. And it's a branch of tokamak, or which is a torus spherical, actually torus sphere with magnetic coils, so it's actually a predecessor to ITER. And actually, it was able to manage to produce the burning plasma for about 30 seconds. So it's like 30 billion times longer than NIF accomplishment, which was long enough. But then again, the temperature was a little lower than the NIF achievement, which was around 100 million degrees, so as compared to 3 million degrees, which was peak temperature achieved in the NIF facility, which is the newest finding, but still is viable. But currently, I think that's the world record. So with this cross-fertilization between this inertial confinement and magnetic confinement, I think we can come up with some better solution, which means better ignition and then better sustainable, long-coming fusion or plasma state for that matter.
Right, and staying with that then, Professor Carter, so simply speaking, US scientists have achieved a major milestone in their attempts to perfect the process of generating energy through nuclear fusion by allowing for more energy to be generated than was used to create it. Now, that being said, what is their next task, apart from, of course, trying to sustain that energy?
Right. Well, it's important to point out that the NIF result is what we call scientific break-even. So the energy from fusion reactions exceeded the laser energy that we use to heat it up. But this scientific break-even is distinct from what we ultimately need for a fusion power plant, which is we need to have more energy produced by the fusion than all of the energy expended to make the experiment happen. So it turns out the NIF lasers, which were not built for energy application, they're 80s technology, and their efficiency is quite low. So it's less than 1%. So it turned out from the wall plug that powers the lasers, it's the big wall plug, but nonetheless, 300 megajoules of electrical energy went into the laser just to make 2 megajoules of laser light. And so that's 1% efficiency. All the rest of that went into heat in the laser. So it turns out that there was net gain relative to the laser light, but not relative to the overall energy to power the laser. So to get to what we need to do, the engineering break-even with this inertial confinement approach, you have two challenges really, and there's more beyond that, but I'll call out two. The first is improving the efficiency of the lasers so that you can generate laser light much more efficiently. And the second is to increase the gain, the energy released by the fusion target. It turns out on the first one, on the laser efficiency, there's already been significant progress. Modern lasers have up to 20% efficiency, and deploying these kind of lasers for inertial confinement fusion would be a huge improvement over what the NIF lasers offer. On the other point about not having enough energy produced by the reaction itself, even though it did exceed the laser energy, you'd like to have that gain, which is about 1.5 here, 3 megajoules to 2 megajoules. You'd like to have that be more like 10 or 20 or 50 megajoules coming out. And it turns out the fuel in the NIF experiment, they only burned about 5%, maybe less than that of the fuel. If you can arrange to have that burn propagate through the fuel and burn up much more of the fuel, you can exponentiate the gain. You can get to much higher power out, energy out.
I see.
Now, I'll say one more thing. This NIF result comes along with several other scientific and technical breakthroughs in fusion research over the last few years, both in the magnetic confinement space as well as in the inertial confinement space. Based on these results, investors have directed around $5 billion in private capital into fusion startup companies in the U.S. and around the world. The Biden administration has named fusion as one of its top 5 priorities for addressing climate change, and back in March launched a bold decadal vision at the White House for fusion electricity, aiming to have a first-of-a-kind fusion pilot plant working in the 2030s. This is a very ambitious goal. So we have our work cut out for us to solve the remaining scientific and technical challenges to achieve this. But I'm more optimistic than Professor Suh about this. I think the U.S. And the world fusion communities are ready to work on this, ready to roll up our sleeves and get to work. And as I said, there's private investors that really see this as an opportunity to really impact climate change in the near term.
Right, hopefully I'll keep my fingers crossed for that. I'm afraid that is all the time we have for this edition of Issues and Insiders then. Professor Carter, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Professor Suh, thank you so much for your insights today.
The best. Season's greetings.
Right, well, that is all the time, like I said, we have for this edition. Thank you for watching. We'll see you back here same time on Tuesday.